We live in a time where masculinity is shamed and men don't know what it means to be a man. As a pastor and counselor, I've spent the better part of my life equipping and training others. My goal with this show is to translate my hard-earned experience into tools and tactics to help you become stronger as a man. This is the BraveCo podcast. I'm your host, Jason Bellet. All right, well, this week I have my very good friend, Abi Stumvoll.
Aww.
Yeah, Abi, man, I'm so excited to do this podcast. And yeah, I think we've only had a couple women on our BraveCo podcast.
Ooh, fun.
And not because we don't love women.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
totally.
actually the opposite. Like we really love women.
Yeah.
But you know, most guys just want to hear about guy stuff and from other men. But to me, you and Justin are just such incredible people. And I've spent the past probably 12 years of my life running with you guys in different levels. Some seasons we're super close.
Yep.
And other seasons we're so focused on stuff that we're building.
Things.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it hasn't really mattered either way.
That's very true.
Yeah. And so I just love you so much. But you and Justin specifically, so if those of you that don't know Abi and Justin, you guys can look them up and we'll give some links and stuff like that. Put the URLs in the podcast info. But you and Justin have so impacted so many people's lives. And the world of emotional health, you guys are just so incredibly great at that and have done a great job in marriage specifically. You guys live a really messy life in the sense that you have lived a really messy life.
Yes, we have.
And have really practical steps and tools and pathways to get to like a really beautiful world. Yeah. And I think for me, and I've lived a lot in the world of church, in the church world where people have really messy lives, but they don't have great steps. They have a great mask, right?
Right.
And they have a great ability to put a front up.
Yes.
But you guys haven't done that and you've chosen to dive in. So we're going to talk a little bit about that stuff. We're going to dive into some marriage too.
Ooh.
Yeah. So we're going to kind of try to get into a little bit of the nitty gritty of your guys' life and marriage. And there's a lot of men that listen to this that, man, even myself, we're trying to not just be better husbands, but like get really practical tools on how to be a better husband to our wives and how to show up emotionally and all that kind of stuff. And you guys are just so open that I figured I could ask you whatever I wanted to.
That is true.
And you'd answer it. So
Absolutely.
Before we jump into this a ton though, I just want to tell people a little bit about what you guys do. Okay. And so you guys have your
podcast.
Sorry. You guys have your website, which is Justin and Abi.
Yep.
And you guys have the Connected Life podcast, which is really cool and really successful. Lauren and I were on there a couple weeks ago.
It was so good.
Yeah,
the
we just had
was awesome.
So much fun. But then really that's kind of like where people can come and get to know you guys. Yeah. It's where you give out tools and all kinds of stuff. But to really like dive into the nitty gritty and you guys have Living Fully Alive and the Pathway to Freedom and like a whole bunch of courses.
Yes. We have a ton of courses and then a 3-year school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
we're busy.
Yeah. In the early years, I say early years, like probably 5 years ago, 5 years and under, I sent so many people to you guys
Totally.
At first.
Yes.
And I send people now to your podcast and to your courses now. Yeah. I originally sent people to you guys for counseling and it was just so awesome. So I don't know, before we do that, I'm going to talk about a quote.
Okay.
Yeah. Just from your website that I pulled off of there.
Great.
About you, but then I'm going to give you a chance to talk. So
okay.
This is really kind of your guys' mission. Is our highest dream is to redefine love in practical and empowering ways. Our hope is that this love would restore and redeem marriages, families, and all the brokenhearted.
It's funny because when you read it, I'm like so moved by it. I'm like, wow, you should narrate that quote for us.
Yeah,
that's
well,
good.
You can pull that.
I can't.
Put it on there.
Yeah.
You know, Justin has a story like most men. You know, grew up in a decent home, lives pretty disconnected from his parents, and although they're incredible people today, and we love them.
but lived pretty disconnected from his heart. And I'm going to talk a little bit about your home, but I want to set up this side of it for everyone. And Justin had a really hard time loving himself, really hard time feeling confident, all those kinds of things. And that's a little bit kind of where you guys met in marriage, was this like these two kind of beautiful train wrecks coming together. Can you give me like just, let's just talk a little bit about how you grew up and what life was like for you, before you met Justin and where you were at.
Yeah. Well, I love it. I'm so excited to be on here. Mostly, I just think how fun to get to have a long chat with you. I was feeling such mushy feelings because there's just so many things in my life that are better from knowing you.
Yeah, thank you.
And me and Justin were beautiful train wrecks. I guess the thing that I love about that is I remember being single and thinking you have to like attain some level of figuring it out before you can meet your person.
It's true.
I remember like always striving like, oh no, I have to work through this before I meet. And I do think that's really powerful to work through as much as you can when you're single, but you don't ever work through it all. You get married and that's like the new ground to work through it.
Yeah. Can you evolve as you grow through life and as you go through life? That's really the question. And if you can't, then man, 10 years of marriage is going to be tough.
Yeah.
And if you can, then, the rest of your life is going to be pretty good because you're growing and learning.
You're growing and learning together.
Adapting, evolving. Yeah.
That's good. So before I got married, it's kind of like a hard story to tell in the sense that like when I was younger, I thought I came from like a great home, felt like everything was good. I had health issues from a young age. Okay. And I started having, because of those health issues, had pretty dramatic panic attacks. And then I also just hated myself. I grew up, what I've learned since.
It's like I had a pretty good childhood, except for I had health issues and I hated myself.
And I had panic attacks and I was suicidal. And that's kind of how my story was, is I was very confused about my story for a long time. And now looking back, I can see like there's a lot of crazy dynamics in my childhood. My mom was mentally ill and a drug addict.
Wow.
And
like prescription drug?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, but it dramatically changed her personality and created a lot of crazy scenarios for us. And so there was a lot more going on. I didn't know any of that. I just thought, we have a great family. Why do I feel so many crazy things? And so as I grew up, I internalized a lot of the pain that was happening around me. So my parents are fighting all the time, or finances are crazy, we're going bankrupt, or we are, my mom wants to kill herself. All of those things I'm looking at and I'm thinking, if I was good enough, none of this would be happening. If I was good enough, I could get my parents to make better financial decisions. If I was good enough, I could solve their marriage. I was a miracle child, so my parents tried for years to have children, and I was the one that was prophesied would live, and then I did, and I'm the miracle. And so that actually, which this is just the truth, the things that are meant to write identity into us, often the accuser comes to use against our identity.
So powerful.
And so for me, instead of it being like, I'm meant to be here and I'm like, God's with me, it was much more like, I'm a miracle. I should be able to fix. It was pressure. I should be able to fix everything. My mom said, you're the source. You're the main source of my joy. But then she wanted to kill herself because she was depressed. So it was like this constant, like, I must be failing everything.
How do I bring more joy so that she doesn't have this hellacious life?
Yes. Yeah. So I constantly felt like a failure. I hated myself, hated my body, hated my emotions, hated my personality. And so it was a struggle, especially a struggle because I didn't understand how my environment was impacting me. So I just thought I was crazy. Which
feels like so many people's story, right? Like I was watching a Joe Rogan podcast the other day. I can't remember who he had on there. He had a doctor on there. And they were talking about ADHD. And the doctor was saying, like, ADHD isn't this mental illness, like, it isn't a disease, sorry.
Sure.
He was saying, this is not a disease. And we keep trying to treat it like it's a disease, with all these different medications. And it's not this, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not to say like, hey, don't take medication. But he's saying the actual source, the root of ADHD is coming from kids who are having to cope for this crazy environment,
Yes.
right? And check out and do all these different
Yes.
things. And I think so many of us, when I look at my past, it wasn't until I was 38 that I realized I had OCD. And that what was causing, for reals,
Totally.
so much anxiety in my past.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, like the
I didn't mean to laugh at you. It just felt so familiar.
it's true,
I'm like,
yeah.
we've been in the emotional health world for 20 years and we still later on in the journey are like,
gosh.
oh, I get it now.
Unpacking it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that was why masturbation became so addictive
Right.
in my life, right? At 10
Yeah.
years old, I'm like full blown, can't not do it. Oh, I was using that to medicate my OCD. I had no idea. Yeah. So here you are.
That brings so much compassion to your own story to start to realize.
Well, right. And once you figure out, and this is the powerful part, right? Once you figure out your story and what happened, it's so helpful because, man, I'm still living that.
Yeah.
Like I'm still trying to adjust and change and grow. And I'm living out the consequences of whatever happened there right now, the fruit of it. And so, man, when I figured that out, it was like, oh, well, what's the tools to deal with OCD?
Yeah.
Someone
Totally.
give me those.
Let's handle
Which was
it.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So here you are and you have this crazy home,
Yeah.
but you think your home's normal.
Yes.
You're the problem.
Yes.
So many people's story.
Absolutely. And then I did have a hormone issue that started in 9th grade. And so now I can look back and see that I was having like PTSD episodes.
Oh, wow.
But when I was in it, I just thought it's just the hormone.
PTSD because of what was happening at home.
Yeah.
So you had hormones and PTSD.
Well, yeah. And the two, like I could, because of the hormone thing, it would just create more of a space for me to have reactions.
Holy
But
smokes.
for years, I mean, I went to counseling for years and did a lot of work because I just thought it was all just the physical reaction, which your hormones really do affect your ability to regulate your emotions.
Yeah.
I just didn't understand that there was so much more going on. So it ended up being really hopeful when I found that out because for years I had the hormone issue and I just felt like these episodes are part of that. I will always just have this torment and I'll try to cope with it the best that I can. And so I got a lot of coping tools. But once I realized it was actually like my nervous system dysregulation into PTSD, then there's totally different tools that then I could use that have helped much more.
Yeah. Like 20
the
years
same
later.
Yes, 20 years later. You're like, oh, okay, this is what's really going on for me. Cool. It's kind of like you realizing the OCD. It's once you, and this is why self-awareness is amazing because once you understand something about yourself, you actually can get the right help for that thing.
It's true. And the challenge is, and again, I'm not against medication. I was on medication for a very long time.
Yeah.
Is like the medication doesn't actually solve, in most cases, doesn't actually solve the real issue that's going on. And man, so many people get stuck in this, really crazy place of not fully understanding their story, not understanding why they are the way they are, but then getting medication to help them cope with where they're at.
Yeah.
But then not fully getting the tools to ever get beyond that, right?
Yes.
So we're kind of stuck in this middle ground of like survival.
Where you're like just fighting to keep your head above the water, but not ever feeling like you can actually stand on steady ground.
Right. Yeah. Which is such a crazy place to be. So what happened as you got older? Like, did you, when did you find out your mom was a drug addict and like all that kind of stuff?
Like 37. That's why I was laughing so hard it feels crazy to me to out myself like this because I've been leading people in the discovery of what really happened in their childhood and taking off denial and all of that stuff. So it was a big whiplash for me when I started. It happened because my mom ended up losing her mind and my dad divorced her and it just opened up everything at once. And so I was in counseling and that's when we started. Now, I will say people had been telling me for years.
It's hard to hear.
And I just hadn't heard or connected things. I was so protective. You've got to think from a young age, I was my mom's only friend and the only reason she stayed alive.
Holy smokes.
So when I had such a weird enmeshed loyalty to her that for people to say, she wasn't healthy or to say whatever. I had such a protection of her that I couldn't actually separate enough to say, yeah, actually, that is true. This is crazy behavior. Oh, actually, this affected. And it was a very slow unraveling. I remember starting with recognizing her behavior. And then eventually when we got to the realizing she was a drug addict, which is funny because technically I knew she was a drug addict because it wasn't like I wasn't aware of things. But then all of a sudden, I remember in a counseling session being like, she's not like a drug addict. Like, it's not like she went through withdrawals. And then I was like, she definitely went through withdrawals. It's not like she did crazy things for drugs. No, she definitely did crazy things for drugs. It's not like and I just started going through all of my stereotypes about drug addicts. And then I realized, no, she actually did all of those.
It's not like she hurt the people around her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not like she had behavior that was erratic and you had no idea what was happening and there was no ability to actually, and I was like, oh, she was really, so it was this slow process. And sometimes I think it takes us a while to have the inner strength enough to call reality what it was.
Yeah, there's definitely a mourning process, right? And I think that's the challenging thing is it's so disappointing to find out, right? Your parents aren't
perfect.
They're not perfect, or mentors or whatever people in your life, right? That in some ways we really want to be strong for us. You've got something that you're pulling on them for as encouragement or hope or whatever strength. And it's a tough thing.
Yeah.
I remember that going through that just a ton, not with my parents, but and maybe in different ways with my parents, but mostly I think with leaders in the church, right? When I was young.
Yeah.
So you look at these guys and you're just like, man, this guy's freaking so solid. And I'm following him and I'm doing his stuff. And then, he freaking gets arrested for embezzling money or you meet their kids.
Yeah.
And their kids are really messed up because the parents, which Lord knows it's not always the parents' fault.
Sure.
But a lot of times it is.
Totally.
And that just does something to you. But when it's your own parents, man, it's so much tougher.
Yeah. It was simultaneously so much grief and so much relief.
Because
I both felt like, wait, my story I've been telling, like that felt crazy to be like, the story I thought my life was is not my life. But it also felt, and it's so crazy how God kind of leads you. I heard this woman speak at this conference and she told this story about how she thought her life was perfect. And then she found herself in this codependent group. And then she realized her parents were alcoholics. And then it was like this huge getting the air kicked out of you moment for her. And she had to reorient in her life. I remember listening to that story being like, wow, what a crazy story.
That girl's life was really messed up.
I didn't think it was messed up. I just thought, what would that be like? Like, that's bananas. And then it happening to me and being like, oh, sometimes God just puts like some kind of compass in your world. So I just remember holding on to like, oh, she said it was healing for her and it transformed her life positively. And so I remember that being like a compass, but it brought relief because I understood myself for the first time. And so much compassion can enter in when you realize, oh, I wasn't freaking out for no reason. I was freaking out because there was so much unsafety and I needed help. And I didn't know how to say I needed help. And then it started connecting me. Like I didn't have very many memories from my childhood. And I hear this a lot as somebody who's worked with a lot of people. They'll be like, I don't remember. And I didn't remember. I didn't, good or bad, just kind of like, And as I've slowly begun to like understand my story more, then I had compassion for myself more. And then more memories came, and not traumatically, like now I feel all the memories that were bad. I actually have as many good memories that have come back as, and so it's kind of, owning my story has felt like it has enabled me to be connected to myself in a much more authentic way.
It's so important because it's like, you can't really get to where you want to go until you accept where you're at. Right. And it's so hard to accept where you're at because there's so much guilt and shame and condemnation. Right. And all that stuff that's piled on us. This is my fault. I didn't do a great job, whatever. And then once you figure out, so the other challenge for people is, let's say that you don't go, this wasn't my fault. My parents were just jacked up. Well, then you have so much pain and anger, resentment. hatred. So it's hard to move forward as well. But it feels like compassion, you use that word a couple times, and maybe we can pull that apart a little bit more, but it feels like getting to this place of understanding, and then compassion is like the birthplace of healing.
Transformation.
Like, this like origin of like, if you can get to some compassion and understanding, regardless of like what's happened, it's like kind of ground zero. From there, absolutely. I can start to work.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe unpack it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think every human, scientifically, for your brain to go through the pain process, you need to feel attunement, which attunement is someone is with you. They are delighted to be with you. They love you. They empathize with you. They see you. They hear you. They understand you. Like, that's an overall concept. And most of us didn't have attunement necessarily. And so there's two different things. We can get attunement from God, which is awesome. I love that. The more I've learned about trauma and emotional health, the more I understand how like generous God was with things that like we didn't even understand.
Right.
Like, I'm like, I didn't understand that worship was also to regulate my nervous system.
Right.
That there's actually all of these like hidden, like when I feel love from God, I'm feeling attunement. That's actually what my soul needs to be able to step out of pain. So I love that. But when we can attune with ourselves, we can have compassion on ourselves and heal that relationship. And that also brings healing to our life. So it's just the concept that the more love enters in, the more our whole stories heal. We become more wholehearted. When love is there, we feel safe enough to be who we are authentically. And when we're who we are authentically, love also impacts us more.
Yeah.
Can I?
Yeah, you can. I'm just sitting here going like, golly, like when you're talking about attunement, right? And the people being present with you and knowing you and like caring for you. I was like, man, if we can get people just to that point, right, where they have one person in their life.
One person. Yep. It'll change everything.
Can know them, see them, understand them, listen to them, right? Like just be with them. Like that's a game changer.
Oh, yeah. It'll change the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. They actually say you don't need 500 of those.
Yeah.
Really one person can anchor you in that. I wanted to jump from there to talk about marriage because it's connected for me.
Yeah.
So Justin, I grew up, crazy scenario, but I don't really understand it. Justin grows up. It was a pretty abusive environment where he was. So we get married. We both just have lots of emotions. We're erratic. We are messy. We both are like. Even
your engagement was messy.
Oh, everything. Our story was just classically us.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was. And it was like. And I think God was so wonderful and kind in helping us get married because I don't know that either of us ever would have because we both.
I could agree with that.
Yeah. So we get married and it is just a mess. And I was thinking about there's two aspects. There's the one about me. So the more I've owned my story, like the more I've been aware of. So once I started owning my story, I realized now you have new things to own. Like my mom was mentally ill. And I learned a lot of my relational habits from her.
Right.
And not meaning to, but I do have a lot of her habits. Like you're very impressionable as a young kid. Yeah. So now I'm having to own, I actually do a lot of these things that is not great behavior. And so I was talking to my husband the other day and I was like, man, I feel like the messiest in life that I've ever felt. And he was like, you feel the healthiest you've ever felt. And I was like, what? What do you mean that I'm the healthiest I've ever? And he's like, well, you have no denial anymore. He's like, you did a lot of crazy stuff in our marriage. You had a lot of like, you'd blame me for this, or you'd have this crazy reaction to this. But then it was all like, it was all denial related. No, it's definitely you and this thing. And he's like, now you're just owning stuff. You're just like, yeah, I am being codependent right now. You're right. I am reacting from like my fear of abandonment. You're right. Like, it's just, and he was like, for the first time, honesty without like shame or denial about like where I'm at. He's like, it feels so much easier to be close to you.
Wow.
It feels so much easier to be on your team. He's like, I actually understand the humanity where you're at. When you're vulnerable and you share about that, easy to love when you are owning it.
Which is like, that's so crazy because I think you're right. It's not the fact that somebody's a mess that's hard. It's the fact that they won't freaking own the fact that they're a mess.
Yeah.
And so it's just hard to be around them.
Yeah. And that would be, I think, my number one pain point that I had with Justin when we got married.
Oh, yeah.
Was he had rage, like crazy rage, and a really tough side. He's an 8, and unhealthy 8s are intense. And so, but it was always like, there was some ownership, but not an entire, like there was a lot. And even in the beginning, it was like, this is what men are. Men are masculine. Right. This is a masculine assertiveness. I was like, this is not masculine assertiveness.
And if it is, like,
I don't want it. I'll give me an emasculated man. But so it's just interesting because probably the most healing in our marriage happened when he went through the same process that I'm talking about, which is just ownership without shame.
Yeah.
Owning, and I think part of it is like giving up the idea of who we think we should be,
right, and
what healthy should look like, and instead being like, what is real? Like, he got diagnosed with PTSD, and that began the change in our marriage because he fully owned his reactions and fully owned.
So early on, when you guys first got married, what was life like?
Well, again, I was really good at denial. So I would have told you we had the best marriage on the planet. Yeah. I'm sure I did tell you that. That's cool. Because I believed it. I did say we were like an Italian couple. We fought hard and we loved hard. And he was more aware that it was like crazy. I just thought this is like, it was still better than my parents' marriage.
Yeah, for sure.
So I was like, this is great. We do love each other.
Yeah. And you guys have so much fun.
Yeah.
So you're a ton of fun and Justin's a ton of fun. And so, it makes a lot of sense that you'd be like, we have the best marriage ever because the fun is super high and it's easy to live there.
Yeah.
But, and then
we were good at trauma bonding.
Yeah.
So we also had really good bonds from how crazy our fights were.
Yeah. We make up fiercely.
Yeah, we do. I was like, we fight hard. We love hard.
But God, that's so tiring.
Yeah. I remember having a marriage counseling session with you early on, and you're like, you guys know that you could get to that same kind of connection without blowing up first. And I remember being like, huh? Really? Because if you've never been around, like my parents didn't have connection. I didn't have a map.
Right.
Justin's parents didn't have connection. So neither of us had a map for how to create safe, normal connection, how to feel normal love bonds, how to feel attached. Really, if we're talking about it, we didn't know how to attach to each other. So we knew how to have explosions that then created us like this crazy emotional repentance. We feel like we just went through this hell together bond. Felt like the only way we knew how to attach. So we had to actually unlearn that to learn how to create healthy.
It makes so much sense, right? Because you only have the tools that you grew up with. And it's easy to think like, well, why didn't you just do this or that? But the truth is like, man, unless you learn a different tool, literally, and unless you're aware of where you're at and when you need to use that tool, like this is the only path that you know.
Yes.
And I was talking the other day, maybe on the podcast here, I don't know. We do so many different podcasts that so many guys that I know are using the same tools to pursue their wife that they used to pursue their girlfriend in high school. Like they've never upgraded them.
Yes.
Or the same tools that they use to whatever, hang out with their friends or feel powerful, like the same exact toolbox. They've never sat down and went like, I need to get some communication skills.
Right.
Like simply watch an e-course, whatever. Like, I need to learn how to set some boundaries. It sucks over here. Like I feel like a boy. Right. I feel like a schoolboy. Like, why do I feel that way? Or, man, the way that I pursue my wife, I just feel like a child.
Totally.
And I feel embarrassed. It's embarrassing. And, or the way that I am in the bedroom, whatever. It's just like, I still feel like I'm 16. It's like, Yeah, because you didn't do anything different.
More skills.
You didn't get any other skills. Yeah. And so, you and Justin, you had these paths, right? Like that your parents, that life had created for you.
Yes.
You put those two things together. And I say this a lot too, like marriage is not a box full of unending joy and fulfillment and like peace. Marriage is an empty box.
Right.
So whatever you
bring in it is
that's
there.
what you're pulling out.
Yes.
Yeah. And again, like, it's so cool that you and Justin have a real work mindset and mentality. You guys are hard workers.
Yeah.
Both of you.
And we want to grow. If we were going to give any single advice, it's like the one thing I tell people, well, I guess two things, is find somebody who cares about learning how to love, which I think you use as like who will serve you or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you find somebody who will grow and learn, because you have to have somebody who's equally willing to grow with you.
Which is essentially saying, find somebody who's willing to be in pain and still move forward.
Yeah.
Gosh dang.
It's hard.
Yeah. So you guys, a little bit of a mess.
Okay. I do want to, this was rolling through my head because I think it'd be helpful for men to know. So my husband and me, when we were a lot of mess. And one of the things that now we can look back and see is that we had a really weird attachment cycle. So Justin, when he feels unsafe, goes into avoidance. So he goes and freeze. He like shuts down and gets quiet or goes into himself or wants to go spend time away.
Yeah.
Or some kind of, and that is a childhood coping mechanism where it, like when you have a parent that is bigger than you, you can either fight back or you can like go inward to try to find safety. So he did that a lot, which made me feel rejected all the time. And we have funny stories. Like when we got married, he would like eat dinner and not tell me he'd eaten dinner, not mention that. So I'd be like, hey, do you want to have dinner together? He'd be like, I already ate. I'd be like, you did? He'd be like, yeah. And I'd be like, did you not want to eat together? He's like, why would we eat together? And I'd be like, well, I'm making food. I would have made food for you. And he's like, why? Like there was no concept of like bonding, or like he would go to bed without saying goodbye or goodnight. I would just be like, where'd Justin go? And then he'd be fully asleep and I'd be like, okay. But like he just had no concept of any attachment. So I would feel rejected a lot by those things. And then, but what we did in the beginning was I'd get mad. And so I'd argue with him like, why don't we eat dinner together? And then he felt like I was the endless need monster.
Shame, yeah.
Well, he also blamed. Shame and blame happened together. So I don't remember him feeling shame as much as him being like, you're so needy. What is wrong with you? We don't need to eat meals together. And I'd be like, this is not normal. And obviously like I don't eat every meal with him now, but the concept of
he's
doing
available
things together.
And he's thinking about you.
Yes.
And he's preferring you.
Yes. Yeah. And so once he started learning, when I don't feel safe, or in my world, I learned not to connect. My safest place was away. Then I started realizing what I do is I get anxious when I feel the withdrawal. Yeah. The withdrawal feels really scary for me. So then I will try any method I can to pull him back.
Is it like, are you flooding him?
Well, I can either fawn, which is like try like sweet, mushy ways to get him back. If that doesn't work, then I normally just fight. I pick a fight. Because if he fights back with me, I've pulled him back in. Right. Now, that was never conscious. If you would have asked me, and you could have told me 500 times, like, do you pick fights to get connection? I would have been like, no, that's crazy. That's what crazy people do.
It's too brilliant. Right? Like we're brilliant. We're like, oh, you want to go over there? Okay, I'll fight you and you'll come back over here.
Yes, I'll poke you. You'll come running back and you'll be intense. And so we do this dance over and over again. And then he would rage, and then we'd trauma bond, and then we would start again. And so as he started owning, I need to separate when I feel in pain, and that separation hurts you. He began to he learned new skills, which is what your conversation reminded me. He started learning new skills. So like now in a fight, he'll be like, I need to go regulate, but I love you and I'll come back.
It's not abandonment. He's letting you know what's going on.
Yeah. And then he will come back, or he'll say like, hey, I wonder if this could feel rejecting to you. So I just want you to know, like, here's a way I'm pursuing you, because I want you to know that I'm intentionally not withdrawing to punish you. I'm not going to stay separated.
Yeah.
And just those things, like, so then my anxiety lowers often when I can tell that when he's like being intentional
Right.
with his pursuit. But all those things are things he had to learn from people who knew how to attach.
Yeah, it's so crazy. Learning what your cycles are, learning, like being able to communicate, like this is really what's going on inside of me and what's going on inside. Like, man, even if you can't fix it right away.
Totally.
Right? Like just being able to go, okay, well, can we map out what we do on a regular basis and what's happening inside of you, what's happening inside of me is so massive, but so many people don't do that.
Yeah.
And it'd be great. Like if you're listening to this and you're married, like map out what is your guys's normal relationship like? What do you do? Which you have to be a little bit honest, right? You're gonna have to go like, man, I feel shame around you often, or I feel anxiety around you. And well, why is that happening? Well, happens over here. I went through, a long stretch with Lauren where, because when we got married and I was in a nervous breakdown.
It's a complicated time to get married.
It was.
It's like a real interesting foundation.
Yeah. And
her normal of you was not your normal of you.
no.
Which is a complicated thing anyway. She didn't
only
fully
knew
know.
a guy that she'd only known a guy in a nervous breakdown.
Yeah.
When we got married.
Which also like freaking rad, because if she wanted to choose life forever with you at your low point, you only get better.
She's either desperate or brave.
That's funny.
Yeah. So, but what came out of that is I felt weak all the time, right? Like I felt max capacity all the time when I knew I shouldn't feel max capacity.
Totally.
Right. But I was so hyper emotional all the time, like inside of me. I was so trying to like just keep it together. And then, I mean, just practical things like I couldn't walk a mile because I had so much physical pain, and I was sleeping all the time. And well, it doesn't take long before you just don't feel like a man.
Totally. That makes so much sense.
Yeah. And then I hated my job for years.
Yeah.
And so like, I felt like this so many times coming home, I just feel like a boy.
Yeah.
And then, not showing up for your wife emotionally or mentally or even physically, right? Not having a lot of energy, feeling weak. Like that would just so many triggers of not yelling at her, because I wouldn't do that, but I would do the same thing in the sense of I would still eat dinner with her. I had a little bit more. But the emotional isolation, me getting away, so I'd go fly fishing 4 days a week.
Totally.
And then when I was home, I would tie flies all day, whenever I could, right? Because just like, I didn't know how to solve what I was going through.
Yeah.
I felt so much shame when she would point out anything like, hey, can you take out the trash? Or, hey, can we spend some time together? Or, hey, I feel like you're just isolating all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, don't you know how hard I'm working? Right, here it comes.
Yep.
And whatever, my criticism, all that stuff. And so that was really, really hard. I remember a turning point was when I decided to be really honest with myself and tell her.
Wow.
Like I actually, so yeah, for reals, it started changing a lot when I started to tell her I feel shame.
Yeah.
And that like ended a ton of the conflict, right? Because I was telling me, hey, you feel a bunch of shame. That's the problem.
Right.
And then I'm telling her like, hey, I feel a lot of shame. And I didn't have a solution for any of it.
Yep.
But I just started to go, this is what's happening in my life. Which, man, you could have shame about feeling shame. Like that shame stack
it definitely does.
Keeps going.
Yes.
But that's real, right? And then at some point, I had to have another hard conversation with myself as a man and go, okay, well, what are you going to do? If you don't want to keep feeling shame and you don't want to feel shame about having shame, then you have to actually do something. You got to make a plan to stick through with it, follow through with it. But yeah, I mean.
Well, I love what you're saying so much because, one, it's not overcomplicated to start a process.
Yeah.
Really owning the vulnerable thing. I know for me, empathy, like when we were talking about attunement, it's so much easier for me to have empathy or attunement towards Justin when I hear something that makes him human.
Right.
And so you being like, I have shame about that. That's something that makes you human. Why? Because we actually all have shame about something.
Yeah.
We all struggle with that. And so when when Justin would be like, hey, I'm feeling really afraid and I'm having anxiety that this is going to turn into a big fight, there's an ability for me to then, the honesty, that moment of honesty, or I'm feeling like a failure, or I'm feeling like I can't be enough for you. That moment of honesty creates room for compassion and empathy and ultimately connection again.
You know what's so funny is that for a man, one, it's bred into our culture.
Absolutely.
But two, it's just like
It's
who
so
we are,
true.
right? Is like, it's so hard. The hardest thing for me, there's two hardest things for me to do. They're equal. The one is to hear my wife's negative emotions about me.
Totally.
Right?
Absolutely.
That's so hard.
That's hard for every woman and every man.
Yeah,
No one likes it.
without like blaming her.
Yeah.
Or pushing it back. But
Yes.
to hear her say like, oh, I feel a lot of pain right now.
Yeah.
Because I was expecting this and that didn't happen. And I'm just like, wow. I'd rather stab myself in the eye, right? Like, I could throw myself off a cliff right now.
Totally.
Whatever, just there's so much pain in that. The other one is for me to, what we talked about, is to come to her and just, okay, I'm about to tell her, like, I feel really afraid right now. I mean, honestly,
It's so hard.
I would
So
rather
hard.
do a 14-mile hike than to tell my wife, like, I feel really afraid about where we're at right now, or my inability to lead us, or, and what's interesting is, I mean, that I feel like that's all men. We did this, I'm going to have you watch it, but there's this reel that we posted where Brian Johnson's speaking. Well, I'm just going to let you watch it. It's on the subject.
Great.
And because we kind of fell into this place, I think it's good timing. So
For my wife, the more I avoided or didn't handle situations, her respect for me really dropped dramatically. And a lot of us men, when we associate toughness or manliness with being a man, it's the opposite of vulnerability. It's the opposite of showing emotion. It's the opposite of having pain and expressing it and putting ourselves in a process. And when my wife respects me the most is when I feel like I'm the weakest. It's really weird. And I feel like God and our wives view us the same way. How in the world can we be viewed as tough and manly when we're crying and we're sharing the secrets of our hearts and vulnerability to our wives, and she says, I love you more now than I ever have? And I'm like, how in the world, what? But it is a real thing. It's a real thing.
Oh my gosh.
it's funny because like this went viral, and Tim and I were like, he was like, hey, did you know that just went crazy? And there's like, whatever, almost 1 million views on it, or like 600,000 views on it.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, what is it? And he showed it to me, and it's just so funny because it resonates with men right away.
Absolutely.
But then also, like, when you start to read the comments, there's guys are split. Half the guys are like literally saying, no, that's bad advice.
Right.
Don't do that to your wife. Don't open up to your wife, because the flip side of what's happening, right, is some guys are coming to their wives and being like, I feel scared. And she's like, you're a little, boy, stop being a female dog, right? Like suck it up, and
Totally.
because she's afraid.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing.
It also really depends on what your normal is. So if you are always in weakness trying to get your partner to mother you,
Oh yeah.
then that wouldn't feel good.
Yeah.
Like if that's your common response, and it also depends
great.
what you share vulnerability in. If I share vulnerability with I'm grabbing you to save my life, then the vulnerability feels more threatening.
That's such a good perspective.
If I am sharing vulnerability with like, I'm sharing this to let you know me, but I'm not you don't have to fix me. You don't have to be my God. I'm just letting you in. That is such a different experience to have somebody do. And so I think that both of those things, and then there are women who also just have been programmed
right.
in culture, either that men should be tough all the time, or they hate their own weakness.
Right.
And so they react because they don't want anyone to be weak.
Sometimes in a codependent relationship too, like if I need you to be strong, man, as soon as you're weak, it's super scary.
Oh,
and it's like, well, what's wrong? You better get your stuff together, because
so that I can feel okay again.
Yeah. We don't realize that that's happening. But I was on a podcast the other day, with this guy who's not a believer, super awesome guy. He's one of the top men in the hunting industry. So, and this podcast is, which is really fun. And he brought me on there, and he was saying, we were just talking together, and I was talking about how I have these group of men that I'm pouring my life into and discipling, and he said, man, sharing my emotions with another guy, like even just doing a book club, like if I was going to read a book with a bunch of guys and talk through it with them.
Yeah.
He said, I've done a lot of 14-day hunts. I would rather survive in the woods with almost nothing for 14 days than to share my emotions with another guy. And I said, well, here's the deal, right? Like, who's the stronger man?
Right. The one who can do that. Even if you were talking about it just in the same terms, if you can survive longer, does that make you stronger?
Yeah.
Well, if you can do the scary emotional thing, that actually shows much more bravery than weakness.
But the bar, right? Like the getting over that hurdle is so
terrifying.
tough. Yeah. So a little bit, I just know Justin, like, okay, I've had lots of experiences with Justin. A lot. And I'm not sharing his trash. Like this is stuff that he shares.
Totally.
So if people are like, gosh, why you like, this is normal. So I remember one day you call me and you say, hey, can you come over? Justin's on the ground, literally like hysterical.
Yeah.
And so I come over and I mean, there's Justin. He's on the ground. Like he's having a flashback.
Yeah, he is.
Like he's in the middle of this like trauma moment, having a flashback. And there's nothing that I can do except for get down on the ground and just lay next to him.
Yeah, totally.
And just like, hey, I'm here.
Yeah.
Like it's all good. And we talk through that. But like.
It did pull him out. People should know you were a little bit of a magician that day. I thought, thank God for Jason Valentin. Because I was like, how do I do with this?
And we all get to do that for one another, right? Mm-hmm. But like you've been with him and watched, like you, on one hand, you're a woman who really needs a strong man, right? And needs security and stability. And like I like to say, like one of the man's jobs is to bring peace to chaos.
Yes.
Like we just do. And that's a good responsibility for us to have. But at the same time, like Justin really had a big process to go through with his anger and his shame and his guilt, all that. Self-hatred that, at some point he's coming to you going like, I'm a mess. I'm stuck in pain. Like, how was that for you?
Well, I honestly, I don't know if this answer will be helpful for people listening or not, but I'll just be honest, which is while Justin was a mess, he also was still really strong and stable in a lot of areas. Yeah. And I think it's helpful for people to remember you can be a mess in one area and still bring stability. Because I think we often do all or nothing. Yeah. I'm totally a mess and I'm ruining my wife's life. Right. Or I'm totally strong and I'm doing everything right for my wife. And I think we often are a bunch of the things at once. It's true. And so I think because I had an experience of him where he was stable with work. He kept working. He's a hard worker. Yeah. And I knew that he cared about that. And he, when he wasn't emotional like that, he was stable in other ways that I think because my childhood was not like that. There was a lot of ways that he was stable. He's stable in creating honestly, a peaceful environment in our home. Yep. He was stable in dreaming, and he was stable in pursuing God. Right. Like it didn't mean he didn't go through hard things with God, but like he continually pursued life and God. So there was a place where even when he was weak, I felt strength from him. And I think that there was so good. There maybe. I don't know that he had shame, he had shame about a lot of things, but I don't know if he had shame about crying and things like that. But I didn't feel his shame about it. So I didn't feel, sometimes people feel shame about having a weak moment and you can actually feel repulsed by that weak moment. Yep. I didn't feel that way. I often felt like, oh, you're connecting to yourself. And he felt life capable. Like he was like, I can figure out how to do this thing, or I can watch a YouTube video and try to figure out plumbing. He's super confident in his ability as a man and just a human being to like navigate through life, solve problems, that kind of stuff. So I think I saw there were areas. Now, even in that, he was pretty honest. So he'd be like, I feel scared that I can't learn to do anything. But then he would do something about it. It'd be like he started, I remember when we lived in Montana, he decided to start painting GI Joes, which is a funny scenario. But he was like, I don't know how to do that. Then he learned how to do that. And then he realized I could learn how to fix our sink. If I could learn how to do this thing with GI Joes from watching YouTube videos, I could learn something else. And so he slowly started building confidence. And I think for me, it wasn't that he had fear that was a deterrent. It was that he never let fear win.
Wow, that's awesome.
So like weakness to me is being like not making any decision to face fear.
Right.
That would have felt more weak if he just swallowed up in it. And I understand there's seasons. I've been swallowed up in fear, and there's been moments for him that he's been swallowed up. So there's not judgment on that. But seeing that he's always like, he made a commitment at a young age, I'm going to face my fear. So when fear shows up, he's like, I'm going to face it. And there's something about just the resolve that felt strong to me. Even if it was messy and vulnerable, I still felt like, oh, you're living by your core value of facing fear. That still feels powerful, even though you're also highlighting that you have fear. So I just think there was enough mixture I didn't feel like him as a man is weak. I felt like he had weak moments. And
you're not like, oh, you're giving up on life and giving up on yourself, and you want me to come rescue you. You're like, oh, you're in a hard moment doing hard things, but like, good on you. You're winning at a whole bunch of areas and trying hard at this.
And the trying. And I think also it gave me permission to be weak and messy. You know, like I'm like, you're like, he's allowing himself to show me those things. There's so many times where he led the way in vulnerability, where then I felt like, oh, I guess you're not going to judge me if I do this. And that felt so amazing. I mean, he liberated me in so many ways from self-hatred by him leading with vulnerability first.
Which I think is so important, right? Because I always say this, like in a relationship, one of a man's jobs is to like emotionally open the door for a woman, right? Like to go ahead of her, which to me means like I do it first. So I'm going to put myself out there and go like, hey, are we at a spot if we're dating where you feel comfortable with holding hands, or like you're emotionally putting yourself out there, and she could go like, no, I don't actually want to be with you anymore. And you bear the weight of that, that burden. And so it's so true. Like in marriage, that doesn't end. So him being able to come to you and bring some vulnerability to you frees you up and gives you the space to go, actually, I didn't want to tell you this, but I feel a lot of shame too. Or I don't feel capable in this area. That's massive.
And that attunement that I talked about earlier. So if he allows himself to be vulnerable and let love in there, he has more love in his bank account to be able to attune with me when I'm in pain. Or now if he allows himself to say, I have shame, like when you said you have shame. Now, if Lauren comes to you and is like, I have shame, you have something you can recall where you've experienced that. So you can instantly empathize. And so the beauty of vulnerability and acknowledging our weakness is it is creating a future account of intimacy.
Amazing. So like people's fear of rejection, right? Like a lot of people spend so much time, when they're a kid, they were vulnerable, and their experience is mom and dad just not knowing how to handle their emotions. And especially a lot of guys, right? Suck it up and just like get over it. And so, I know that's a little bit of Justin's story, but can you speak to that a little bit? Because I really do feel like so many people have so much legitimate fear and trauma in broken relationship. Like I'm never enough. You're not proud of me. And now I'm in this marriage where how I got to this place was I survived, and which was winning. Cause I don't always think surviving's bad. So by the way, a lot of people dog surviving. I'm like,
I agree.
You have
Survival
to survive.
is beautiful. And super badass.
And so, but we get into these places, right, in marriage where it's like, man, again, I only know what I've been through. And up until now, this was hard. Like anything beyond me being hard and kind of shut down and the man like gets punished.
Right.
Like, what do they do for that?
Well, my first thing is, I think it's really important to pick the safest person you know to start practicing vulnerability with.
Oh, that's good.
And that may or may not be your spouse.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I mean, I wish it was everyone's spouse, but it's just not the case.
Fact.
And I also think you pick a small thing, because here's what I see. If people try to be too vulnerable too fast with somebody that's not safe, you actually will lock yourself down more after that.
Yeah.
You will never be vulnerable again. So I think bite off like a small amount of vulnerability, which maybe for a man is like you bring your best friend out for breakfast and you just have one semi-deep question.
Yeah.
That's like, what's something that you feel like you're being brave about right now in life?
Yeah.
Just
great.
some kind of question. And maybe that is vulnerable for you.
Yeah.
To just try to bring the conversation to a little deeper level.
Yeah.
Or you go out with your best friend and you're like, I'd love to start just sharing a little tiny bit about some of the fears I'm having. Would you be open to that? Like most people, if there is a level of safety and you give and you don't have to rip off the Band-Aid and be like, tell them every fear you've ever had and all of the most vulnerable things to you. So I think like take whatever baby step looks doable.
Yeah.
Because you're wanting to create something that feels like momentum. Like I wanted that, so now I can do it again. And
so good.
So that's what I would say with vulnerability. Start with somebody who feels genuinely really safe. And like if you're in a marriage and your spouse doesn't feel that way, something you can do is like, hey, I've been realizing I would love for us to be able to be more vulnerable in our relationship. Is that something that is in your heart? Just like the vision casting, you don't even have to be vulnerable. You can just start like talking about it as a concept. And you can be like, what would scare you about being in a more vulnerable connection? And then maybe you'll just have an honest conversation just about if that would be something you could do or not.
Which is vulnerable in and of itself, right? Like painting that picture for your wife is a vulnerable but powerful step in the right direction. I love it. It's the tiny habits, right?
Yeah.
It's if you take a small step, eventually you build this big pattern, this culture that just becomes you. It just becomes who you are. It's so smart because I do think that we try to tackle everything at once or nothing. It's all or nothing. And rarely is that the best option.
The other thing you can do, this is like a sneaky, almost manipulative thing you can do, but I still like it as an idea, is you can get really good at celebrating anytime you see someone else around you being vulnerable. Because what it starts to do, let's say your wife does something that's a little bit vulnerable and you're like, man, Justin, this is what he started doing to help me learn to be more vulnerable, is whenever I do a little bit, he's like, man, I feel so close to you when you share like that to me. Man, that really makes me feel bonded to you. Man, I really like being around you when you do things like that. So if you as a man and your wife does something like that and you just affirm that, it actually sows into your bank account. The affirmation happens when vulnerability happens. So eventually when you're vulnerable with her, there is this pathway, a neural pathway in her brain that says this is celebrated. Or if you're a guy with your guy friends and a guy just shares like, man, I had a hard day. And you're like, dude, thanks so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
And you don't have to because men aren't going to be flowery. Like I would be like, man, that's so wonderful. I love it so much. I feel so close to you. Like they're probably not going to. But like if you just are intentional about affirming it, what that does is it tells your own heart, this is lovable.
Yeah.
This is worthy of connection. This is celebrated. Just celebrating yourself, other people will start to tell your own body it is safe to do this.
Yeah.
It will also create a culture around you where people start to celebrate it with you.
It's so good. So last year we did like our 12-month discipleship course that guys jumped into a whole bunch. And
I love that.
Awesome.
We've had several of the guys in our courses do that and talk about how much they've loved it.
Yeah. The funnest thing is like we had one of our guys, Byron, who graduated and he got like the Man of the Year award. He's just this awesome dude. Yeah. But when he first came in, right, like almost the first 12 weeks, he didn't want to talk at all. And he's a power lifter. Like he's this big,
oh my
buff,
gosh, I love it.
Big, tough guy, Canadian. And it's so funny because he signs up for this course, right? Pays $1,000 to come in and gets put into a small group of people that he doesn't know.
No.
And is ultimately signing up to be vulnerable and to learn. It is like, I just want the content.
Right. I don't want to have to interact.
I don't want to interact. But because he kept showing up. So that was the key for him is he just kept showing up and he watched all these other guys be vulnerable and real. And pretty soon he's like his heart's kind of aching, right? Like I want to be able to do that and I want to jump in and little by little, he watches this culture that's happening and it just sucks him in.
Yeah.
And once he gets sucked in, right? Like, his marriage, he starts to be vulnerable at home with his wife, which was so massive. It's what you're saying, right? Like if you can just start small and it may be like, maybe you have to switch the group of guys that you play basketball with, right? Like maybe you have to invite some guys to go play pickleball with that, are like do this stuff.
Yeah.
And you just hang out with him. Or maybe you're like a great fly fisherman, like put a guy in your boat that's an awesome dude.
Yeah.
But if you just start small, I've just seen that happen for guys so much. Like you're saying, if you can change the culture of the guys that you're in, like if you can get into a culture where it's already going, man, that's one of the easiest ways to grow.
Yeah. And I've seen, so often there are a bunch of men around, most men, who want to go deeper.
Yeah.
There's like some kind of connection. You may not know it from the outside, but I have so many stories of people that like eventually were just like, hey, I think I'd kind of like to go on this journey. And then there's several men that are like, I've been wanting to do that too. And so there is that. And even like a small step, like you said, what I love is there is strength in showing up to the thing that scares you. So him just showing up week after week after week, if we can see that as powerful is when you are choosing into something that scares you, that's power. Yeah. That is masculine. That is strength. So then the process of change often feels really slow to us. Like now we would look back and be like, in a year, he freaking changed so much.
He changed his whole life in a year. It was crazy.
But 3 months of that was I'm just doing this one thing in front of me. And even things like if you're listening to this, that means there's something inside of you because Jason is raw and honest and connected. So if you're listening to his podcast, then that means you already have this desire. You already have something inside of you that knows there's more to life. Like I think love is like the food, the dessert of life. It's the goodness in life. And you can only get to love through vulnerability. And so if you're listening to this, you already have the hunger to be more vulnerable, to be more connected. And it might scare you so much, but just by you showing up, even in just listening to his podcast and hearing somebody who's not afraid to be honest, who's not afraid to be vulnerable, who doesn't have shame when he says he felt shame about not being able to be enough as a man. Like if you're listening to this, there is a hunger in you and you're already beginning your journey towards that just by participating.
Yeah, it's awesome. I want to pivot just a tiny bit and talk about you. Because, when you started talking about like you went through in 9th grade, like you started this journey of like your hormones being off. Like that, like that's still with you today, right? Yeah. Like you have lived so many years with like illness.
Health issues.
Yeah. It's been crazy. And, it's really common. It's fairly common for people to go through that, especially, or to have like a spouse that's in the middle of that. Right.
Totally.
And that can be really challenging on the marriage and relationship. And I just want to kind of unpack that a little bit and ask a few questions around it because, maybe I should say this, like what has been the biggest challenge for you personally going through like in 9th grade, if you would have went, man, I'm going to be 40 years old. I don't know how old you are, but 38 years old and still dealing with this. Like, oh my gosh, how are you doing that? Like, how are you doing? And how do you live day in and day out with like this illness that's just, it's been with you for so long. Yeah. You obviously have created quite the ecosystem inside of yourself to endure. Yeah. Because you have to endure every day, I'm imagining.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, thank God I didn't know I'd be sick this long. I would have killed myself. Yeah. Honestly. And and that's because when you imagine a future without grace, it's always going to look too tormenting to want to survive.
I hope people pause that and go back and listen to it.
Yeah. It's just, thinking of the future and whatever pain can happen and whatever trauma can happen, you can actually traumatize yourself just by visualizing your future
For reals.
like that, because we very rarely visualize our future with God, with grace, with love. Like, so if I would have been younger and visualized being sick my whole life, I wouldn't have visualized the amount of love and care people have given me. I wouldn't have visualized the amount of grace with God involved. I wouldn't have visualized the amount of like joy and
satisfaction that you have in your life today. Yeah.
If you would have said you're going to be sick when you're 38, I would have been like, then that means I won't ever get to live.
Right.
And I've lived a lot. Like, there's a lot of things I've done that have been fun and adventurous. And there's a lot of things, life experiences that I have loved that have made life really beautiful. So you don't imagine that. So that's the first thing, is imagining the future kills you.
Wow.
But I think for me, there's a couple things that I've learned on the journey, which is,
can I just stop you really quick?
Yeah.
Because I know that you're going to go down that path. But
Sure.
imagining the future with hope and with grace is not like a small thing.
No.
So, because you don't have to have some illness to like imagine a future that's dim.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
And
I'm always going to be in relationships that hurt me like this. I'm always going to be struggling in my career. Like, people take whatever pain they have and imagine it's going to last forever.
how did you learn that? Like, who gave you that key, or where did you learn that, or when did you first implement that in your life? Because that's a hard thing to do.
It is a hard
That's
thing
not
to do.
an easy thing to do.
You know, honestly, I will say there's several things. Paul Young, he's the guy who wrote The Shack.
Yeah.
And he went through he had an affair. He got caught. It opened up all of these secrets. He opened up about all the secrets he'd had, all of the trauma he'd had. He went through an 11-year season of processing and working through all of the stuff that got unlocked and how much of him had lived a separated, dissociated, hidden life. And so he talked a lot. He's one of me and Justin's mentors, and he always talks about, you only have grace for the moment. You only have grace for the day. And so I've heard that for the last, I don't know, 28, like 15 years ish. And so he's always like, don't future trip. Future trip. That's what he calls like tripping over a future without God. And I always was like, okay. It felt like really trite advice when I'd call him and I'd be like, I'm just really freaking out about blah, blah, blah. And he's like, well, you're tripping over the future. And I'd be like, but how do I fix it?
Yeah. Do you have any other advice?
He's like, stop doing it. I'm like, But one of the ways he learned it was because the pain was so excruciating that he actually didn't have the capacity. Like, when he was especially the beginning part, he wanted to kill himself. He wanted to die.
Yep.
The pain was so intense that he had to, it no longer was, what is the future going to be? It's just, how do I live in this moment? But the beautiful thing is, the pain being that intense helped him learn how to be present.
Right.
And I have found that, so I got really, really sick a couple of years ago, probably like 4 years ago. And I've been sick my whole life.
When you get sick, what's that look like?
Well, 4 years ago, it looked like I couldn't walk more than like 10 feet. I was having like constant, like Charlie horses, where my legs were locked up from my stomach down all the time. I was getting massages multiple times a week. It didn't matter. I was so exhausted. Walking 10 feet would wear me out.
Wow.
I laid almost all the time. I was no longer absorbing nutrients. I lost 30 pounds. Multiple friends who are not typically the fear people were like, you got to just put her in the hospital until she's fixed, because people were concerned I was dying.
Right.
I looked bad and I felt bad, and I was in so much pain physically that, and this is awful, but I like begged Justin one night. He has a gun because it's him. And I begged him if you love me, you would kill me, because I'm in so much physical pain, and I've been in so much physical pain for so long. Like, have mercy on me.
That's a dark moment.
It was so dark. I don't recommend it to people. Now looking back, I can be like, yeah, that's crazy. And I feel bad. I had to apologize for Justin, because that's like, that was not a fun experience for him.
He's like, wait, you really want me to?
I mean,
this would feel like love for you.
He was feeling very traumatized.
Yeah, super traumatized.
And I was like, I was so sick that I also was like, I mean, I would like shake in pain.
Gosh.
And so, I couldn't eat anything. It was a mess. Ended up going to Spain. It was miraculous in that it just helped it stopped the downward spiral. Didn't mean I magically was better, but it did mean that I was no longer getting worse all the time. And, but in that season is when I start, like the fear for me, the panic was, what if my whole life is like this? What if the pain is always this intense? What if I always can't eat anything? What if I always, and that future panic of like, what if I never get to live again? And that actually was as tormenting as the pain, was the fear
Absolutely.
Of how long will this last for?
Which I say that all the time, right? Like the fear of anxiety, the anxiety about having anxiety is the worst anxiety.
Yeah. And so something about it being that bad, something switched over where all of a sudden I learned I could see finally how detrimental thinking about the future was.
Wow.
And I started to be like, the only way I can make it is day by day, like moment by moment. Like, do I have enough grace for today? Not imagining, I can't imagine if I'll be healed or not healed tomorrow. I just need to imagine that, like, I just need to find, what do I have today where I can be happy or come alive?
Wow.
What is the thing where's the moment of love that I experienced? So many days it would be like the sunset, which I think is so random, but I could see the sunset from my couch, which I laid on and all the time. And so I'd just be like, oh, there's beauty in the world. Like, God loves me. I would just feel like God loves me. This is the one way. I can't feel him in these other ways, but I can feel him in the sunset. And so there began to be, and the other thing I did is I allowed the emotions around being sick to bring up, like, I really embraced, okay, my body has held on to a lot of emotions for a lot of my life. So what is it that I need to feel that isn't about being sick, that is at the surface? And that is, I did a lot of healing work in that season.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, I mean, I would start to feel so panicked and trapped about how powerless I felt in my body. And I'd be like, okay, if this is a flashback that's not about my body, which it feels so much like it's about my body, but if this is a flashback, what is the flashback? Okay, where did I feel powerless and trapped? Okay, as a kid, it felt like my dad hated me anytime I was like my mom, but I'm a lot like my mom. So that feeling of being powerless and trapped in a situation that, okay, I need to go just love that girl and tell her that I see her and tell her that it's okay, that she's not understood, and tell her I can see the grief that you're in, and just grieve for that moment. And oftentimes I would do that, and then the intensity of what I was going through would just lessen a little bit. So I started to like see it as like a potential for the flashbacks. Yeah. Instead of being like it. All of my friends thought, no, it'd be normal that you're having this high emotions about how bad your body is. But I knew.
You're like, is there a possibility that this isn't all just about the here and now?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
And so the one thing that I will say, I live by the Psalms in the sense of like, I feel totally comfortable to be mad at God about my body and to be thankful. Yeah. For all that he's done inside of that. There's a million, I have done treatments all year this year. And I had people to travel with me to every treatment. That's like crazy. That's so rare. And I don't even know how it happened. So I'm like, I did learn gratitude. The gratitude is you hold on to the grief and the gratitude. You got to hold them both. But if I would give my the best advice I could give is, learning how to regulate my nervous system more than focus on healing my body has transformed my life more than anything.
Just go into that a little bit.
So sickness, especially the doctor I work with, he'd be like, figure out how to have no stress in your life. I'm like, oh, easy. Yeah. I'll just not have any stress in my life. And I think it's funny when you're sick, you're stressed because your body can't do anything. So like telling you not to have stress while your body is malfunctioning.
I'm
is
stressing
bananas.
about not having stress.
Yes, 100%. So, but stress adds so much to chronic health issues. Right. So, and then there's so many studies about how your body keeps the score and holds on to trauma. And so the more I've learned about regulating my nervous system, and there's so many things you can do. I've learned how to do way more grounding exercises, which is like learning how to be in my body. I had jumped out of my body because I was in so much pain
Right.
in my
Why
body.
would you want to be in your body?
I didn't want to be in it. But I learned that you could be in your body and not be focused on the pain.
Yeah.
Like I can sit and think about what it feels like to have 10 fingers, and I can move them around and think about how, like, I don't have to be
Yep. Stuck in the torment
I don't
in your
have to be
body.
stuck in the torment. So learning grounding, like breathing exercises have really helped me.
Yeah.
Learning ice baths, saunas.
Yeah.
I'm doing a lot of things that are about regulating my nervous system. One of the best things I've learned is collecting moments of resource, which is crazy, but you're just taking experiential Polaroids of good moments for your body. So like, this is a dumb example, but I struggle with bladder infections. And when I'm in a bad cycle, it's like I can't pee ever without pain.
Yep.
So what I started doing is every time I could pee normal,
You were like,
I would think about how good it feels, what it feels like. I would describe it to myself. I would narrate it.
Right.
And what happens is, so your brain attaches to negative experiences like Velcro. So you go through, like, you can't pee. Your brain really latches on to how much pain that is. Good experiences flow through like water through your body. So it just goes in and out.
Yep.
And so you have to actively learn how to attach to good experiences and make that as much Velcro as it is for the negative. So that's actually how I would say I got out of like the mindset of sickness, is to start attaching to the pleasure and the good moments. Oh, I'm sitting on the couch watching TV with my two best friends. We're not doing anything. It's not this magical moment. It's just this moment of, I feel safe right now. Like right now, no one's hurting us. We're not needing to run a mile. We're not, like, whatever it is. Like right now, I can feel that like warm feeling of like, aw, we're connected. We're just watching the show. But like my brain had to start grabbing moments of good feelings, the little ones, not the like, I feel like I'll be safe forever. I feel zero pain in my body, and actively narrating, experiencing, enjoying. And what that did is it began to rewire my brain so that now sickness isn't only associated with trauma for me. It's like now I'm seeing how much pleasure my body gets to feel, but in different, like pleasure being like the feeling of relief when someone walks in the room and you know they know you. Yeah. I never knew what that felt like in my body before because I wasn't connected to my body. Yeah. But like now I can know, like when I see, like if I saw you in a room and I was having a hard day, this has happened before. Like you've been very kind and warm. I can feel my body just like, oh, I'm safe. There's somebody here who believes in me. There's a body sensation that goes with that. And until you're being mindful of that, you're not even getting to collect all of the resources that are happening around you. So the more you become rich in resources, it's easier to process grief and have it not topple you.
Man, it's so amazing. You know, when I went through my nervous breakdown, and you know exactly how this is, right? I lost the use in both of my arms. So holding a cup of water, I'd have to hold the cup with two hands, and couldn't drive without using my knee a whole bunch, and can't make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, right? And it creates this whole world for you, this identity, I guess is what we should say. Yeah. But then you spend the rest of your time, right? The rest of your life trying to work your way out of that. Totally. Which is crazy because you're always so afraid that you're going to get back into it, that even when you're not in it, you're still in it. Right. Because it's just so traumatizing. The fear's hanging over you. Yeah. And the biggest tool for me in my life has been Philippians 4. So Philippians 4, I'll just paraphrase it. It says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. Let your gentleness and kindness be evident to all, like God's near. So like be kind to people. Right. God's right here, right? Like live like that. And it says, if you need anything, go ahead and let God know. And then it says like, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your heart and mind, right? And then it goes on to say like, finally, if anything's lovely, holy, pure, like really cool. Right. Think about this stuff. Yes. And then it gives you this promise again, right? And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your heart and your mind. And so once this is why I love God. He like wrote into the Bible. Yeah, it's amazing.
Like that is describing your nervous system. Even.
So this is what happened, right? I find out that I have OCD, and I'm working with my therapist, Margaret Nagib.
Cool.
And so I didn't know I had OCD. What had happened was I had in 2018 and 19 were like the best years. When you go through those years that are just like, wow,
yeah,
this year was amazing.
Yes.
So Edie was getting born in 2020, and I was like, I'm coming off my medication.
Right.
So I'd used my medication to get me to this point, and I'd done a bunch of work.
So great,
I'd done a bunch of work mentally to like get to 2018 and 19 was all because I'd done all this work. Right. And my nervous breakdown was in 2009. So just to give people a timeline.
Right.
So 2020 rolls around and I get off my medication, clonazepam or clonazepam, sorry. And which that helps me regulate my nervous system. And it's very addictive.
Yeah.
Also, like really addictive. So I had to wean off and do all this stuff. Well, here comes my anxiety, like an old friend.
Absolutely.
And it is scary.
Yes.
It's so scary.
Absolutely.
And so I'm having anxiety, like level 8, not 10, like level 8 anxiety all day. And I'm working through it. So I call Margaret and I'm just like, I don't know what to do. Am I ever going to not live like this again? Am I going to, and I'll make this short because we've been going for a long time. But she said, Jay, like what you're telling me sounds like OCD. And she said, she was so kind. She said, like, I'm not saying that you have OCD. I'm just saying that like, this is what people with OCD right? Yeah. And then she gave me these 3 things to do, which I've already gone through them all. So I'm not going to go through them all. But what has helped me the most to regulate my nervous system has been, because I used to have this thing where I could get so fixated. I could ruminate on almost any fear. Like,
absolutely,
I'm going to pee. What happens if I have to pee all day?
Totally.
And then I'd pee all day.
Yeah.
For reals. And then I'd be so afraid. And then that would happen for like weeks. And I'd wake up and I'd pee like 6 times in a night and just like tormenting. Right. Totally. Or like my brain would do that. And then I'm just emotionally draining myself and just getting stuck in these crazy fear cycles. And so one of the tools, right, is she gives me these 3, which I'm not going to teach them, but I'm just going to teach this one part because it's pertinent and important, is she says you have to first recognize, then you need to relabel, and then you need to refocus. So the recognize is like, recognize that it's what's OCD. Happening. Yeah. And then the relabel is what's happening. Then the relabel is like, oh, that's not me. That's OCD.
Absolutely.
And then the refocus though is if I could get myself to focus on something different, gives my brain a chance to reset, right?
Yes.
And so what I found was the best for me, which I love what you were talking about, is if I started to do like crazy thankfulness, not just like, I'm thankful for the car, but like if I got into, like if I embodied thankfulness, like and dove into it, everything else would stop. Yeah. And it would like right the ship.
It's amazing.
It was amazing. Yep. So what I was using medication for years, I learned how to do through this like ninja level thankfulness, right? And then what happens is I built such confidence in this area.
Then you had less fear.
So then when the fear would come, even unconsciously, I would catch myself being like, oh, it's not a big deal. I handle this.
I can get out of this.
Yeah. Yes. And when you were describing what you're doing, right? Like I'm being present in my body. I'm not necessarily giving the pain, like I'm not giving it so much attention that it's just ruling my life, and I'm not dreaming with it, right? Yeah. But I'm actually going, okay, what areas of my life do I have power in? What are my areas of my life am I thankful in? Yeah. What is really happening? Like, so this is happening, but there's also a lot of other things happening, right? Being powerful in your life, because it is so important, because the truth is like, we all have areas of our life
that we're out of control,
that we don't have control in. And the worst pain is the fear of the unknown, right? In allowing yourself to fixate and get caught on that. It's just crazy.
Totally.
But all this work that you've done is like insane. Like I'm genuinely like so proud of you.
Oh, thank you.
It's honestly how you live like a healthy, happy life in the midst of like physically not feeling good.
Totally.
Oof.
Yeah, it is. It also was for me. Thank you for saying that. I feel really loved. You are good at attuning. Good job.
Thanks.
I think I used to think it had to be this grand thing, and that's why I never did it.
Yeah.
Instead of like, I'm just now noticing small moments. So like a moment would be like, oh, I'm sitting here, and instead of just like going through this like I always would and being like, that was nice, I'll be like, oh, I actually genuinely feel like Jason has seen how hard I've had to fight. And I genuinely feel like he's proud of me. And I genuinely feel like he's been cheering me on and he's been kind. And then in my brain, that it's just taking that second to notice that a moment is happening that's positive. And it doesn't have to be level 10 positive.
Yeah.
It can just be like, oh, I feel a little bit of gratitude right now. And then when you start the gratitude circle, it starts it. So then my brain goes like, oh, remember that one time you were really doing that good and him and Lauren dropped off this gift card and you felt really loved by that. And then remember this thing. And then all of a sudden my body, and now I'm aware of it, my body starts to feel that like slightly more relaxed, like instead
calm.
of being hyper vigilant and having my guards up, my body's like, oh, I remember being loved in this way and this way and this way. And I'm not ignoring all of the other things in life, but there just begins. And so now I can be like, oh, body, what does it feel like right now when you're just getting to feel safe in this moment? And it's just the mindfulness for me of taking a second, just like right then, oh, I feel seen. So a lot of people go around feeling not seen or not heard forever, and they want to have a great experience where like the prophet calls them out.
They're looking for level 10.
Yes. Instead of like, did I just feel seen for a moment with somebody? And if so, how can I like soak that in and really like let it marinate so that it affects me? Anyway, doing that has dramatically changed me because with PTSD, it's the panic that I'm not safe.
Right.
And so what I had to relearn was just, I can just have a moment of being safe, and that can actually start to retrain my whole brain. I remember I know we got to go, but
no, you're good.
I was in Hawaii. I was in the middle of a season, very intense PTSD episodes where I would be like hiding in the back of my closet because I'd have so much panic coming up about things. And I remember we're in Hawaii and me and Justin were at the beach. No one else was there. It was warm and our feet were in the water and he had his arms wrapped around me and I could feel a little bit of anxiety just about my future, right? His future. And this is why I brought it up, because I was like, hard things can actually give you the tools that can make your life great forever. So it's like true. Paul Young going through that whole thing, learning how to not future trip. He has held that not future trip skill long past getting out of that hard season. For me, going through this horrible season, learning how to be present in the moment and being present in my body, I'm not in that horrible season anymore, but I still get the skill I got from it. So I'm on the beach. I feel a little bit of anxiety. And so I just choose, instead of leaning towards the anxiety, I choose to lean towards what is good in that moment. So I started being like, right now, no one's trying to rob us. No one is threatening us. No one's yelling around us. Right now, Justin has his arms around me, and it's not, do we have a perfect marriage? It's that right now in this moment, are we safe and connected?
Wow.
Right now in this moment, is the temperature nice? Right now, like instead of, and my mind would want to do like, well, I feel really safe with Justin now, but yesterday we got into a fight and blah, blah, blah. Instead of, and just like silencing, no, like just this moment. What is just this moment? And all of a sudden I was like, I'm really safe. Like I'm really safe right now. And just touching safety affects our nervous system. Just touching love affects our nervous system. When we just touch a positive resource, it like fills our bank account. So that then when our nervous system goes into anxiety or shame or whatever, we have more gas in our engine to be able to handle it. And it isn't these extreme examples of like, everyone in the room is celebrating me and loving me. It's just these little moments where you then are narrating to yourself, I'm safe. I'm safe. Everything is going to, like in this moment, I am okay. I went through the hard season when I was sick, and I would go to my counselor all the time. I'm not okay. I'm never going to be okay. I'm not okay. I'm never going to be okay. I'm not okay. And so I had to actually train my brain to recognize moments where I was okay to get me out of that.
Gosh. So
maybe we've just lived the same life story, but different ways.
Yeah. No, I mean, and if you took 100 people and put them in this room, 90 people have something that,
absolutely,
man, that just has felt like that in their life. But to me, there's two things. The first one is, if I could get everyone just to do the little tiny things, and you hear that a lot, but the truth is, like, if I can just teach you, do the little things
absolutely
that you're supposed to do, day in and day out, just do them repeatedly. That creates so much momentum. And
absolutely.
when I tell people, like, those 3 things, reflect, relabel, and refocus, changed my life. Like, man, it's like if she would have told me to do something crazy, right? Like, you got to go to Madagascar and you got to live in the jungle for 6 months. That probably would have
felt better to you.
It would have been so much easier. Because it feels certain. Like, I feel like, okay, I'm fighting this big battle, so I got to do this big thing.
Yes.
And instead it's like, but I just believed her, right? So that when I first started doing it, it was like, it helped some.
But not a ton.
Yeah, like I'd want to, like, I'm battling, right?
Yep.
I'm battling because I don't have a ton of trust in it. And that was okay. I was just super kind to myself. But at the same time, the more I started to feel calm and the more it would work for a few minutes, then it was like, oh. And so, I mean, I just tell people, like, in your marriage, if you just do the little tiny things, just start, don't try to solve everything. Just do the little thing. Just whatever it is, wherever you know to start, right? In your journey, whether it's loving you or being vulnerable or setting some daily habits for your kids or whatever area that's, that you're like, I know I can do this. Massive. And then the other thing that you hit on a lot is, can we all just paint a picture about our future that has hope in it?
Yeah.
And there has to be this boundary line in us that says it's a violation when you start thinking about your future without hope. You might as well just take that day off.
Yeah.
And go like, hey, today's not a good day to think about it, right? Like, I'm not in good shape to do this. Let me just do here and now. Because so much of what we are telling ourselves is such a lie. I mean, we're not going to get into politics and all that.
Sure.
But people who are going, man, today, day and age, like, we live such horrible lives. We're so, there's so much trauma. There's so much. And it's like, well, yeah, look at 1,000 years ago. The most simple person today has access to more assets, more comforts
absolutely
than the richest king 1,000 years ago.
Totally.
Like, can we just change our perspective? And that may not change everything right now. It's not going to, but what it does, like Abby's talking about, is little by little, you change your brain.
Yes.
You change yourself.
Yes.
Because you're never going to change everything outside of you. So, man, if we could just change what's going on inside of us and partner with God to do that, like, what a fantastic life.
Yeah. It's very true.
Abby, you are an incredible human being. And man, I'm so thankful to have you on here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. We've been going for a long time, but would you pray for us?
Yeah. But before I do, I'll just say, I'm so glad that you have this podcast and your other podcast. It feels very exciting that more and more people will get to, you're so good at breaking down the pretension that I think a lot of people feel like they have to pretend to be, and like meeting them with love and compassion. I remember, like, when I was telling that conversation when you're doing marriage counseling with me and Justin, and you're like, you could get to connection without the explosion. You have such a way of challenging while still holding empathy. Like, I didn't feel any shame when you told it. It felt like, wow, this is crazy, but this is a crazy light bulb. It seems simple, but when you said it, it felt powerful. Like, you're challenging us, but you felt so kind. And I think because of your own journey, you just bring so much empathy into humanity. And it feels like you bring people back to loving the journey as a human instead of where they need to get. And I just love that about you.
Thank you so much.
I'm
I
really glad
appreciate
you're
that.
influencing people. But
Thank you.
God, we just ask that your love would come and that you would meet every person who's listening, that your kindness and your compassion would start to awaken something inside of them where they would begin to have permission to feel compassion towards their own story, that they would begin to understand their own story, that there would be such a deeper revelation of who they are and where they've come from, and that there would be love and grace as they see themselves, that you'd give them a whole new perspective on themselves, that they'd see, that every person listening would see themselves through the eyes of love, through the eyes of patience, through the eyes of tenderness, through the eyes of belief, that they would see who they were when they were younger, who they were at their worst moments, that they'd begin to understand why they've done what they've done, and they'd begin to see that little lovable human that was inside of them the whole time. God, we ask that you'd break shame. People that are terrified of being honest with themselves, or terrified of being honest with other people, or have some secret that they're holding on to, that there'd be so much grace and courage to push into that fear. God, that your love would empower people to step out of fear, to step out of shame, that there would be divine connections, that people who are hungry and ready would be like, I want somebody to be vulnerable with, and they'd meet somebody that was safe, or they'd finally have a conversation with their friend they've had forever that went deeper, that God, you would hold people's hands for every yes they say in their hearts, that you just unfold the next step, the next little thing. God, I ask that you'd begin to just drop into people's minds. What is the next little thing for them to do? What is the next little way to engage love? What is the next little way to choose life? And God, we ask for people who are sick. We just ask for healing, that there'd be divine healing for people who are listening, that there would be miraculous healing. And God, we ask for every person who's been through a hard season, who has had OCD or nervous breakdown or sickness or anything that has got them stuck in a torment loop. We ask, God, for a way out. We ask that you'd open up the door for a way out, just like Jason found a counselor in the right moment who had a pathway out, that there'd be pathways for anyone listening who feels stuck, that they would find the pathway out to wholeness and freedom. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Abby, once again, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
You're such an incredible human being. Guys, this week, implement just one thing from here. Pick one small thing that you're going to grow, that you're going to practice, that you're going to do. So stay brave this week, men. We're out.
Bye.
Hey guys, thanks so much for listening to the BraveCo podcast. If you like this podcast, would you please rate it, review it, leave us a great comment. And if you like this episode in particular, share it with your friends and family. That helps us to spread the word. Guys, stay brave. We'll see you next week.